There we go. Oh, nice flounder. Wow. Hey, what's up, Salt Strong family? This is Pat Ogletree. I'm one of the fishing coaches here at Salt Strong, and in this video I want to talk to you about late summer and into fall flounder fishing. And we're going to talk about where to find these, what to look for, what equipment to use, and how to catch these fish. So first thing I'm going to do is talk about the actual flounder itself and what's not to like about these. They're very abundant in our coastal waters. They taste really good, they're fun to catch, and it's a really cool fish to get people that aren't necessarily into fishing. Maybe they're new to it, especially the kiddos out there. When you catch that flounder, it's such a unique looking fish. It'll definitely keep their interest up. So something I highly recommend is doing some flounder fishing. So let's get right at it, and let's talk about the types of places that I like to look for when I'm flounder fishing. So the first one is what we call the backwater, the marsh areas, and that's like this right here, this satellite image that I got. These are basically just grounds that hold tons of flounder. They'll hold flounder year round, but particularly in the summertime and the fall when we get those runs of shrimp, when the outgoing tide happens and that hatch happens, the flush that comes out there and the amount of shrimp that gets flushed out of these marshes is absolutely amazing, and all the predatory fish know that, especially flounder. So when you're fishing a marshland like this, the areas that I like to look for, depending on the wind and the tidal situations, is particularly all these little drains that you see, all these little cuts. And what I mean by a drain is, in these marsh systems, as a tide comes in, the water is going to push up and it's going to get up in these grasslands. And sometimes, depending on how high that tide is, it could, anywhere from, get just a little bit of water in there to, almost covering this marshland up. But as the tide falls, what's going to happen is that water is going to fall off of that marsh, and it's going to get down into these little creek systems, and these are the drains. It's where the water drains out of the marsh, and that's where all the bait will get flushed out, and it eventually will wind up in the mouth of these drains. And again, the predatory fish know this, and these are great ambush spots. So anytime that you see one of these drains right here, especially during a falling tide, that's my favorite time to fish these. They will be there on an incoming tide too, but falling tide particularly seems to really congregate those fish up and really bunch those fish up at the mouth. But in these marshlands, this is where you want to fish at, right here. Now, sometimes what will happen too is they'll actually get out on these windy points too. This is a really common thing that happens during the summertime. You get on a day that's got a nice breeze, got some wind in there, got some tidal movement. You'll want to be on these outside points, checking those out along with these drains. That's a really good spot to fish for during a slack tide. So if you got a slack tide, especially say a high slack tide where you got the water that's all the way up against that point and it's up on that point a little bit, and you've got some wind right there, that's where I would go. Now when the water starts moving, then we're going to move over to the drains and fish that area. Now depending on which points that you're going to fish and what side of the point, it's going to be wind dependent. So let's pull out just a little bit right here. So let's say we have a west wind. So what I would do is I would actually fish these shorelines right here and this side of the point right there, maybe that shoreline right there. Opposite is true on an east wind. If you got the wind coming out of the east, then you want to fish this side of it and then fish this side of that point right there. On the north, same thing, north facing shorelines, and then on the south, you want to fish the south-facing shorelines and maybe even venture up here and fish this right there, these grass lines. Now, what will happen is these flounder are going to move and position themselves differently depending on how late in the season. Now, in a marsh area, they typically will hold fish even through the wintertime because this water will heat up in the wintertime, and it'll keep those fish there because it's, shallow, usually muddy bottom, and it heats up a lot quicker. And then whenever you get those cold nights, they'll just find a deep hole within this marsh and they'll hole up in there. And these flounder are really hardy fish, so they can take some cold temperatures, so they're not going to move too much if they don't have to. Now, if you're fishing, say, in an area like this right here, where you've got a bay system right here. Now flounder will in the wintertime push up into these creek systems, and they'll stay up there for the wintertime, and then as the water warms up in the spring, they'll start working their way out. And that's why, you know, during the springtime and during the fall time, these creek mouths are really good places to find fish. Not just flounder, but redfish and trout will be here too. So we're getting right into that time of year where this is probably going to start happening, where the creek mouths are going to be really the ways that you want to fish, these marshlands and the creek mouths both. Now moving on to another place that you can find flounder in the late summer and early fall is going to be inlets and passes. Now this is typically another one of those spots where you can catch them year round, but definitely in the fall time, because what's happening is these fish will migrate out. Not all of them go inland into the backcountry, into the marshes. Some of them are going to go offshore, and they're going to hang out on the wrecks and on the any types of rock piles or any kind of structure out there. So you will have them moving in and out of the passes. And one cool thing about these passes and these inlets is a lot of times they're accessible by foot, by boat, by kayak. You can fish a lot of different areas. And what we're looking for in an inlet is going to be a little bit different than what we're looking for in a marsh. Now, in an inlet, typically deep waters, holes and depressions that are in the bottom of that inlet, the flounder are going to lay flat right there on the bottom and wait for that current to bring that bait over the top, so they can swim up there, grab their bait, and go right back down and lay flat on the bottom, so the current doesn't bother them. You know, a place like an inlet, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for structure, because they are very structure-oriented fish, and I like these jetties. So you've got a jetty here, you've got a jetty right here, and then this one extends out. All along that has the possibility of holding flounder, but what I like about it is the jetties that are next to deep water. So let's pull up our shaded relief here real quick, and then we can see that we've got some deep water here, we've got some deep water here, and right around there you can see that current kind of pulls around that tip of that jetty and creates a little wash. These are all perfect places for flounder, because what they can do is they can get down at the bottom and they can wait for that current to bring the bait over, but if they want to move up into the jetties to feed around the rocks, those are available and they don't have to travel far. If you think about it, fish are kind of lazy. They don't want to have to expend the energy that they don't have to, or they don't want to, so they'll get everything that they need as close as possible. So if they can find that depth, if they can find that structure and that bait all in a close proximity, all the better. So you want to maximize the amount of those types of places that you have in one area. So these jetties are great. And again, this is something that is going to be something that you can fish by foot and by boat. So it's something that you land-based anglers can work on. Another place near inlets are bridges. If there's any bridges in the area, those pylons for the bridges, those are awesome current breaks, and the fish will stack up on the downside current of those pylons. So if it's an outgoing, they'll be on this side. If it's an incoming, they'll be on this side. And again, they're just waiting for that current to bring the food right past them. They can grab it and go right back in that current break. And it's a great place to fish. Now, most of the time with bridges, you do need a boat to fish that, but some bridges actually will have some fishing piers by them, and that's another great place to look. And if we go over here, if we come back around this inlet right here, we'll see a shallow flat that comes up right there. That grass line on the edge is another place that you can find fish. Now this is something that you can actually wade to. I don't know about this particular area, but you know, if you're seeing a grass flat near an inlet that's got some shallow water that's really close to deep water, we'll pull that shaded relief up, and you can see right there the edge of that flat drops off right into that deeper water. Prime place for these flounder to hang out. So that's an accessible place for you land-based fishermen. Just a great looking area right there. And then let's move on to the last place right here that I want to take a look at, and this is pier fishing. Now this is definitely a place where you can catch an abundant type of fish, but flounder are a possibility here. So we've got a fishing pier right here that's got some structure, but the thing that I like about this area is this right here. Now the reason why I like it, you've got a rock wall structure right here, and it's adjacent to deep water. So again, we're going to pull up our shaded relief and take a look at that. So we've got it's in deep water that is right up against that rock wall, and that's exactly what we were talking about before, just like in the inlet where you're maximizing the amount of structure that you have in the smallest amount of space. So right here what we have is during an incoming and outgoing tide, we're going to have current that's going to flow in and out of this inlet, and we're going to be able to reach that deep water. It's within casting range, and you've got that structure of that rock wall. So you've got the current that's coming in at high and low tide. You've got the ambush points that is going to be the deeper water and those rocks, and I'm sure you're going to have bait. So you've got the ABCs of being able to find your inshore fish right here in this area. So definitely a great place to look at. So if you're land-based and you're looking for an area to fish for flounder specifically, I'm going to look for areas that's got some depth change like this. Some of these piers that you see, they'll be up on a beach, which is possible, but it's not going to be a high concentration of fish in that area. Something like this where you've got a lot of shallow water and you've got just this little area deep water, that's going to concentrate these fish. So that's something that I would look for as a land-based angler. Lots of depth change. Great spot here. Now let's move on to what we're going to use for bait. So live bait fishermen, it is hard to beat a mud minnow for flounders. That's probably the best thing out there. If not, shrimp always work too. Everything eats a shrimp. Those are great bait for flounder. But if you can get a hold of some mud minnows, those are really the way to go. And as far as you artificial guys, these flounder really like bigger baits. So bigger paddle tails, those 5-inch paddle tails, and the big jerk shads with enough weight on them to keep them on the bottom is really what you want. So one of my favorites is the Bomber, our Bomber series of bait, which is our 5-inch paddle tails. Another one is the jerk shad, and the color is going to be dependent on what they're feeding on or what the water clarity is. And what color you're going to use is going to be dependent on what they're feeding on. If they're feeding on shrimp, it is hard to beat either the Fred color or the Slam Shady color. Those work really well. I've got a lot of flounder off of both of those. Now how I'm going to rig them is going to be dependent on the areas that I'm fishing. If I'm back over here in the marshlands, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them on a rigging hook that's going to keep it weedless. That's going to reduce the amount of hang-ups and snags that we're going to have on the oysters and the grass. But if I'm fishing an inlet and a pass, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rig that on an open jig head, something like a football jig head, and the weight of the jig head is going to be dependent on the depth and the current of the water. Say in the marshes, I'm only going to be using probably 1/8 of an ounce most of the time because I'm fishing really shallow water, 2 to 3 feet. But these passes can get really deep and you might have to get down, 20 feet or more. So, it could be a 1/2 ounce, could be 3/4 of an ounce. But I want to make sure that I'm getting contact with the bottom because that's where these flounder are going to be, is right on the bottom. Now, the equipment that I'm going to use as far as the rod and the reel, basically your standard inshore setup will work perfectly fine on flounder. These are not known to make powerful runs like, say, a big redfish or anything like that. They're more related closer to the way a trout fights. So if you get a flounder that's pull and drag, then that means you got a really good flounder. But the setups that I like using is a 7 to 7.5 foot medium power with a fast tip as far as the rod goes. And the reel, I'm going to use either a 2500 or a 3000 sized reel. Spool that with 10-pound braid and use a 20-pound leader, and that'll pretty much catch just about any flounder that you're going to run across. Another piece of equipment that I'm going to highly recommend when you're out there is flounder are the Houdinis of fish. They have this knack of being able to get off the hook right at the boat, so a landing net is something that I strongly recommend. Can't tell you how many times I went to scoop that flounder up and it got off right before I can get it in the boat. So landing net, and definitely have it ready to go. So what I do is I have my net right on the bow of the kayak so I can just reach out with one hand and grab it as I get that fish close to the boat and scoop them up. That way I got less of a chance of missing that fish. Now, as always, rules and regulations are going to change dependent on your state and even maybe a county that you're in. So if you do plan on keeping flounder, you want to make sure and check your local state and regulations. Now, our friends up in North Carolina, they just got their flounder season for 1 month starting in September. So I know that's going to be a really popular fishery, but make sure the area that you're fishing in doesn't have any closed seasons, or what your bag limit is and what your size limit is. Make sure you know what the minimum and maximum that you have to watch out for. So this covers our flounder fishing for late summer and early fall, and if you've got any questions, put those down in the comment sections below and I'll answer those as soon as possible. And if you've got some flounder tips you'd like to share, just put those down below. I'd like to read those too. So if you're looking to try any of the lures or any of the equipment that I mentioned in this video, I highly recommend going to fishstrong.com and checking out our tackle store there. The lures that I highly recommend for flounder fishing are going to be the Power Prawn USA Original, like these right here, and then also the jerk baits, the Alabama Leprechaun Fred, Slim Shady Jerk Shed, and then these bombers right here. All of them are excellent flounder lures, and not just flounder lures, they work really good on redfish, sea trout, and snook too. So go to fishstrong.com and check them out. And while you're there, make sure and read the reviews to see how successful people have been using these lures. And if you're new to Salt Strong, just know that we are the best online fishing club in America, where we guarantee that you'll catch more fish in less time, save money on all the tackle that you need, and make friends fast, or it's free. For more information, go to saltstrong.com, and until then, we hope to see you in the insider community soon.